So here we are at Quest Festival. I'm joined by Peter Owen Jones, the 21st century priest, spiritual explorer, TV presenter and author, whose philosophy is that spirituality can be found anywhere, not just in a church. As a BBC TV presenter, Peter's explored the world's vast pantheon of spiritual and religious ideas and distilled essential wisdom for contemporary modern living. In recent years, he's presented some award-winning TV documentaries, from Extreme Pilgrim, which was nominated by the Daily Telegraph as the best spiritual documentary ever, or religious rather. We've had Around the World in 80 Faiths, How to Live a Simple Life, and he's also written 4 highly acclaimed books, the most recent being Letters from an Extreme Pilgrim. After an early career in advertising, Pete left the rat race to join the clergy and was ordained in 1992. He is now a house duty priest in the Sussex Downs. This summer, Pete managed to steal away to Greece for a writing exodus. And Pete, how was Greece this summer?
Greece was very hot this summer, and I was down on the southwest corner of Crete, and it was very beautifully windy as well. So it sort of alternated between extreme heat and then almost hurricane force winds.
And did you manage to get much writing done, or was the ooze?
I did, yeah. I find it the only way I can really write is being a parish priest. Obviously, the doorbell goes, the phone goes, everything happens. So, yeah, the way I write is to actually just sort of completely put myself in a writing bubble and then carry on from there.
Well, I gather you gave birth to 2 books on that trip, but we're going to talk about those 2 at the end.
Okay.
For now, I just want to ask you a little bit about some of the fascinating TV series that you've become so well known for.
Sure.
And we'll start with Extreme Pilgrim. You set off to the east to explore the spiritual enlightenment that you felt Britain had lost, and you encountered in 3 series. Firstly, the extreme martial arts in a monastery in China.
Yeah.
The Kumbh Mela festival in India, where you hung out with some sadhus.
I did.
Explored the path of the sadhu, and a cave in the Sinai, where you obviously explored the Hermetic tradition of living in a cave and being in silence for a few weeks.
Yeah.
Did you feel what was lacking in Britain? Did you feel you found that in some of these extreme experiences that you had?
No, I didn't. I found that what was lacking in Britain was actually what was lacking in me, and therefore it was such a great privilege to make those journeys. And you know, it's very easy in our culture, you know, we're always looking for someone to blame, but I came away from those experiences actually realizing that it was me who was lacking in my capacity for love, my capacity for forgiveness, my capacity for grace. And that was what I learned, that these things are not down to other people. They are down to each one of us as individuals, and I cannot expect society to fill the spaces I have in my heart and my soul. This is something that I have to take responsibility for myself. So I'm not going to look towards religious leaders or towards politicians or towards anyone else to do that for me. If I am to take the spiritual path, then this is something I have to do because I feel called to do it, and not to expect others to provide that for me.
But presumably you've learnt a lot from those experiences.
Yeah, I learned a tremendous amount from all 3 experiences. First of all, if you're going to be serious about the spiritual path, then you will need discipline. And I learned that very much in China from the wonderful monks in China. If you're going to follow the spiritual path, then you need to experience a sense of freedom. You need to give yourself permission to be free enough to do that. And I learned to do that in India, and with the sadhus, who were just nothing other than wonderful to be with. And they taught me that everything I was attached to, I didn't need to be holding on to. And if you're going to follow the spiritual path, you need courage. And I learnt about my own lack of courage, spending time alone in a cave in the Sinai desert. And that if you are going to follow a spiritual path, then it is going to take bottle, and it's going to take courage and determination. And there is no other way around that. There are no shortcuts here. You're in it for your life as long as you are still breathing. And there is no such thing as results. You know, we live in a result-orientated society. It is just constantly work in progress. And it is a process of learning to let go rather than learning to acquire.
And with the sadhus in India, you actually had an experiential experience of taking up the sadhu path for a few days under
Yeah.
your sadhu guru at Kumbh Mela
Yes.
festivals
Yeah.
guidance. How was that?
Well, I mean, sadhus are peripatetic. They live on the streets. They wander from town to town, village to village, city to city. And that was extraordinary. I have never spent 3 weeks of my life in a constant state of laughter. And at one point I was asked to explain what happens in a Christian church on a Sunday morning. So I said, well, we all walk in, then there's a bit of silence, then we may sing a bit, then there's some prayers, then I might stand up and rant for a while, and then we all share some wine and some bread. And I went through this explanation, and the two men I was with sat there shaking their heads, and they went, yes, yes, yes. They went, but do you laugh? And I went, well, no, not really. What they were talking about was actually expressing the joy of being alive. And we're so caught up with what we imagine to be surviving, and we're so entangled in that process with the economic mores that we have allowed to wrap themselves around us, that we very rarely in the West experience clear, uncluttered, innocent joy. And yet that is so essential to our experience of being a human being. You know, if you look at the media, it's constant drama after another, constant pain after another. You very rarely see joy expressed. Yeah. Men especially, I think, are not great at expressing joy. Yeah. The dolphins are much better at it than us. The goldfinches, the birds, the butterflies are much better at expressing joy. You know, we need to give ourselves permission to be joyful. And the sadhus really taught me that.
And some of the sadhus have all sorts of austerities and mental tasks they perform, putting their hands up in the air for weeks or years on end.
Yeah.
Do you think that actually helps them get more joy ultimately?
I think that's
a very different sort of path.
No, I think that's about discipline. And as again, I said, you will need discipline, a sense of freedom, and you will need to have courage. And I think that part of the austerities that they put themselves through are part of recognizing that those three other disciplines are actually important ingredients for those of us who choose the spiritual path.
In the cave in the desert, you were 3.5 weeks alone in a cave in the spirit of the Hermetic Christian fathers like St. Anthony. And you've described that the desert was your greatest teacher.
It was.
And you described having nowhere to go. In the West, we tend to run away from ourselves a bit, and we almost design our lives to be too busy to look at ourselves. But there you were alone, faced with all these your own sort of insecurities, weaknesses that came up. And that process you've described is incredibly strengthening, and you talk about it actually mended you to a degree. Can you explain how that process worked for you?
Again, I mean, in the West and the manner in which most of the planet now seeks to live, we fill our lives full of distractions. Some of them are rather beautiful distractions, but some of it is just pure noise. You know, the noise of a radio, the noise of a television, the noise of a motorway service station. In a cave in the desert, you don't have any of those rewards or excuses to call upon anymore. You are left with nothing, ultimately, but yourself in its most real state. And there is nowhere to hide. And therefore, taking that process means you actually have to face some of the things that you would really rather remain buried. And some of the things that almost subconsciously we keep buried because we actually don't want to go there. But if we are to grow, if we are to become, if we are to develop, then we have to look at those areas, the darknesses within us that we would rather not face. The spiritual tradition is full of this wisdom. The story of St. George and the Dragon is about actually facing the darknesses within each of us and having the courage to do so. Being placed in a desert cave, I was ultimately terrified because I realized I hadn't had the courage to actually take that journey beforehand. And if you think it's 5 weeks out of a life, 6 weeks out of a life, we can all afford to do that. And yet, the person that emerges from having spent that time is really very different from the person that started that process.
Would you be tempted to say that that was maybe the most profound experience of your life, or important experience?
No, I think I have a profound experience looking at a tree. I have a profound experience looking at a baby, looking at a river, looking at the sky. But I think that experience taught me to value that in that manner. It broke me open, so that I was able to recognize all that I had so lightly passed over.
And while you were in the cave, you wrote a number of letters.
Yes.
Which you later published as a book.
Yes.
Called Letters from an Extreme Pilgrim.
It's a dreadful title.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And you wrote letters to anyone from God, Satan, Jim Morrison, ex-wife, children, etc. Did that book arise spontaneously out of just being in the cave and wanting to write what came up?
It did arrive spontaneously. I mean, I'd sort of come up with, I suddenly thought 2 or 3 days before I went, I'm going to have something to do. I'd noticed that monks and nuns living in community had something to do, that they worked. And that is part of expressing our creative nature. And so I thought, well, I might write some letters. I had no idea that it would be a book. I thought I'd write letters and I'd either keep them or post them to those who I knew that were living. And it was only when I got back that I thought maybe this would make a half-readable book. And I went to a publisher and they were foolish enough to agree with me, and the rest sort of unfolded from there.
It's a beautiful book. I read it, and there's some wonderful poetry in there, very soulful and very, very touching.
Thank you.
Well, the next series was called Around the World in 80 Faiths.
It was.
Where you opened the gambit and went a year-long sort of whistle-stop tour of the world, 80 different rituals for different faiths. And you did Sufi whirling, Aboriginal dreaming, there was trance dancing, African Bushmen, there was voodoo ceremonies, all number of different traditions and experiences. Did you find there were many commonalities in these diverse rituals and traditions that you came across?
Absolute. The same taproot, the same yearning, the same longing, the same questioning about what it is to be a human being and what informs my human identity. And whilst that is the choice for each one of us, the questions we are asking are primarily the same, whether we are Vietnamese, Australian, Russian, Uruguayan, or Welsh. We're asking the same difficult questions. We just happen to have come up with really very slightly different answers. That's all.
And which of these rituals brought you closest to the divine, would you say? Were there any
I think
strong experiences that...
Yeah, I think for me, without a doubt, the Jain tradition, centered in Shravanbelangola in India, have a tradition of honoring, not harming any other living being. And for where humanity is now, the great vandalizing and devastation that is unfolding at our hands in terms of the natural world, and our seeming inability to understand and celebrate that we are in a community of life, and we are a member of that community rather than in charge in some weird kind of way of it. I think the lesson of the Jain faith was quite beautiful for the world that we live in today, and really taught me that I have nowhere to run if I am engaged in despoiling the natural world. That is really an immensely selfish act, whether I do that knowingly or whether I buy into that system through the manner in which my food is produced, the manner in which my furniture, my white goods are made. If I am adding to that destruction, then that is something which I must be mindful of, and I must seek ways to honor the earth through what I consume and the way that I consume it.
Did you find that you changed a lot, that it really sort of changed your attitude to your role as a parish priest and the way you view Christianity, or saw the limits of it?
I think it sort of helped me understand that each faith tradition has something to teach us, has something to say to us, and has something to say to me. And it made me step back from Christianity, which is my own tradition. And it sort of helped me to see it from a distance. And really, I think I came back from all the experiences that I had, understanding that I was not actually honoring what a priest is supposed to do. Not in terms of status or social position, all that's toxic and dreadful, but in terms of humility and in terms of one's ability to embody love, and one's ability to not live acquiring more and more possessions. And I sort of came away from all of those experiences understanding that I had really not been the priest that I had seen others engage themselves in, both men and women. And I had a lot of work to do on that front. And that is now work in progress. It's very easy as a parish priest, especially as a Christian priest, because everything's set out for you. There are all these boxes, and you're given them, and you're told, well, this is the box to use at this particular point, and I've just sort of burnt the boxes, rather, at this point now. My definition of God is pure consciousness. So that involves knowing the dark stuff as well as the light stuff. And it involves honoring, to a certain extent, one's place with both of them. I would say that God is much more multidimensional in the truest science fiction understanding of that word. God is not something static, as we see presented in the West through the Christian tradition, and to a certain degree within the Islamic and Buddhist and Jewish traditions. This force, this energy is utterly fluid and sensitive and responsive and personal and intimate. God is a teacher of love and of all that unfolds from love in terms of justice, honesty, intimacy, and grace. And that it is not this male disciplinarian sitting on a marble throne somewhere in some rather strange Neverland that only apparently good human beings get to. I don't know any good human beings at all. We are human beings, all of us, and we all have our stuff to deal with.
So you returned from your trip around the world, visiting all the faiths, to Credit Crunch Britain, and back to the frenzy of spending and consumerism.
Yeah.
And you probably felt a little bit culture shocked after your trip, and you decided to turn your back on consumerism. You were looking for something a bit more meaningful and looking for something more simple.
Yeah.
And you decided to follow the lead, the spirit of St. Francis of Assisi, and live without any money for a year, and give that a go in your local parish community.
I did.
And you became self-sustaining as much as you could. You were gardening. You were learning how to to
Beg.
keep your chickens going
Yeah.
and so forth. How was that, not having a bean in your pocket for the best part of a year?
It was immensely liberating. I mean, the moment I handed my wallet over, you can feel this weight suddenly lift off your shoulders, you know. And I would say that has probably been my greatest teacher.
Yeah.
That experience has weaned me off acquisition. It's taught me that if I'm going to follow the path, the human path, then I don't need to be constantly buying stuff. I need to live with as little as possible and to share as much as what I have with others, and to give as much stuff away as I can. The system that we live under, first of all, forces us to compete with each other all the time, which is not healthy. And secondly, constantly reinforces the illusion of ownership. Ownership is not a reality, it's a belief system. And that experience totally helped me to understand that ownership was, the whole idea of ownership was really very toxic, and I needed to step back from that completely. And it is the idea of ownership that is one of the taproots that is really destroying our planet.
I love that sense of that in Mongolia, actually, where there's just no fences.
No fences.
And there's just no one owns anything. It's nothing divided up.
Absolutely. During the Romantic movement of the poets, the Romantic movement in this country in the mid-19th century, there were several minor poets who actually took their own life when farmers started fencing the land. Yeah. They were so disturbed by what was happening. We've now just accepted it, but if you think about it, it's horrible. Horrible.
So, Pete, I'd like to just turn the clock back a bit to your earlier life. You left school at 16.
I did.
Went off to Australia to become I think looking for your fortune originally, but became a jackaroo.
No, I wasn't looking for my fortune. I was just, I'd been kind of sent there. I'd been kind of banished, and I went there and worked on the land for 18 months. Yeah, it was good.
And you returned and ran a mobile disco.
I did.
Went into the advertising industry as a copywriter.
How foolish was that?
Climbed up to creative director.
Even more foolish.
And I'm imagining at this stage a sort of probably a fairly irreverent, sort of fast lane rock and roll kind of guy, living in the material world.
Yeah, I was unpleasant. I was an unpleasant human being.
And then suddenly, amidst all that, bang, you found God and life completely turned itself around to something completely different. What happened?
I experienced a calling, and whatever I did, I couldn't shake it. I tried to drink it out, smoke it out, run it out, every single way, but it wouldn't leave me, and eventually I did come to my senses and was fortunate enough to be taken seriously, and then went on to study theology and philosophy, and rather poorly, I hasten to add, and then becoming parish priest, a very poor parish priest.
And was it a difficult transition to make? Sort of letting go of those attachments to material life?
No, it was a wonderful transition to make. It was like coming home.
Yeah.
It was a move in the right, I felt it was a move in the right direction.
Sort of at last, sigh of relief.
Yeah, in terms of me as a human being, I really could not stomach the material path anymore. I felt that it was, first of all, devaluing our humanity, and secondly, quite clearly destroying our brothers and sisters in the natural world. So it felt like a huge relief.
An interesting time to become a priest in a world where Christianity is now sort of crumbling.
It is.
And I wonder what you see as the evolving model of the sacred.
I think as long as Christianity continues to hang on to dogma and doctrines and all the really very bland traditions that have evolved, it will continue to decline. When Christianity begins to understand that Christ was the teacher of consciousness, then perhaps we can begin to love again. At the moment, my main concern is, and I must point the finger at myself here, when you look at Christianity, when you look at Islam, when you look at Judaism, when you look at Buddhism, when you look at Jainism, do you see love? What do you see when you look at those world religions? And if you don't see love, and if you don't see tolerance, then I think that there are some very big questions to answer on those fronts.
I think you see probably more fear than love.
Yes, and that's my main concern. But again, I know lots of Christian priests who are in the process of detoxing themselves from really the weight of the past and trying to reimagine what it might be like to follow the Christian path in the absence of all the ropes that are there to apparently hold us down. And in that sense, yes, the old model is crumbling. Yes, it is quite clearly collapsing. But in a sense, that creates huge space for the imagination and what it might become in the future. If it is bold enough to imagine, if it is bold enough to love, then there is always hope. But I have no idea what Christianity might become. No idea. But I do know that it cannot carry on. It cannot carry on in the same box that it has currently put itself in. I think that's quite clear.
Finally, you, as discussed earlier, you birthed a couple of books in Greece. One is about spiritual walks.
Yes, it is.
You've done a collection of nature walks for the Sunday Times.
Yes, I have.
Fairly regularly. And this particular book, I believe, is going to be a sort of more in-depth reflections on
Yes.
on the state of the human condition right now.
Yes,
as
it
you
is.
do these walks
Yes,
through
it
these
is.
wonderful natural parts of England.
I need say nothing more, Will. You've said it all.
But your second one is about the environment.
Yeah.
And I wonder, you'll be exploring the need to take care of the planet, and I wonder what you think we need to do to...
I think the second one is, again, looking at the human identity at the moment. How we've ended up with the identity that we have. How we've ended up, how we've all ended up in a place where, first of all, we are fleecing each other, and that's allowed, if not even encouraged. And secondly, how we are vandalizing the planet in the process. How have we got here? And what can we as individuals do to make sure that we are not fueling this toxic combination and handing that model on, that very destructive model on to our children. I don't have any answers. I only would like to explore the possibilities that presents.
Well, thank you, Peter. I look forward to reading that, and thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
Thank you.